I've been hardening out my plants and realized I needed more space. And then I ran into this bucket container idea that would allow me to overwinter plants like peppers and tomatoes simply by bringing them inside. But I also liked the idea of a raised bed like this. It was then that I decided I could have both if I just did a few modifications. Let me show you what I mean. I watched a few videos and everyone seemed to be using this model for the bucket containers. All I needed to do was expand the bottom portion from 25.5 inches to 32 inches. That would give me a raised bed 20 inches wide with the 12 inches I needed for the width of the buckets. I figured I could break down a shelf I made before I began woodworking seriously to cut costs and use cheap pressure-treated wood for the remainder of the frame. So it was off to the big box store to put the plan into action. One thing I always do at the big box store is check the discount wood pile, and there I found several pieces I could use in the build. And the price was right too. Back at my workshop garage, I began the process of taking apart the rickety shelf, and I realized how little skill I had back then because I used a combination of screws and nails. So, taking it apart was going to be work. It wasn't as bad as I thought, but removing the nails was time-consuming. And now I was able to begin the build by cutting a 32-inch bottom to make the two sides that form the body of the stand. The height of the bottom section would be 19 inches, so while putting in the sections for the buckets, I had to be certain of that measure as the front would be the raised bed. I also had to be careful to do my favorite task, making pilot holes, because the wood will split if you don't do it. And on to adding the second piece to make the 12-inch section for the bucket. Then finally, the front section for the raised bed. In no time, I had the two sides completed. I just had to remember to make the second side the opposite of the first, because they'll be facing each other. All I needed to do then was join the two sides with 52-inch bottoms to give myself more than enough room for 4 buckets and a nice length for the raised bed. I turned the frame on its side to make the work a little easier to put in the front and back braces that would make the frame for the raised bed. It was beginning to get dark, but I completed the frame for the raised bed. The next day, I decided to put in braces for the raised bed to avoid the risk of buckling for the 52-inch length. With that done, it was on to putting in braces for the buckets on top. I put in a bottom brace, but as you'll see later, realized I didn't need it and moved it to the top. A number of videos I watched cautioned against hanging the buckets by their rims because they'll be carrying a lot of weight, in addition to becoming brittle, and experimented with a 2x3 support that wasn't as heavy as a 2x4. I just set it in to see how things would work. I then experimented with the buckets and thought it made sense to put in separation between the buckets to keep them stable but not tight, so I could pull them out if I needed to. At this point, I'll admit to an executive decision. I was running out of decking screws and decided to use pocket screws for the final framing, which is why you'll see the long screw head from here on. Not perfect, but I just wanted to finish without another trip to the big box store. I put in the side brace for the top and finally settled on a 2x4 under the buckets to give them a wider bottom support. All in all, it was looking pretty good. Now I could move on to adding a front face to the raised bed. I used redwood fence pickets to give it a nice look. Once I got the faceplate cut, I also realized the remaining piece was just enough to cover the sides of the raised bed. All I had to do now was attach the front and back faceplates along with the sides to complete the raised bed. I did have to shave off a 1/2 inch from each faceplate board because these fence pickets were actually 6 inches wide and not the nominal 5x5 they say is 6 inches. But that didn't take long. I can laugh about it now, but while putting in the final section, I jammed the screw head into my finger, and it really started bleeding. I wrapped it up and kept going, but I now had a war wound. I ended up moving the back brace to the outside to support the long back faceplate and prevent buckling. And then the stand was finally done. And here is the completed raised bed and bucket container stand. I even have room in back where I can store extra pots and other stuff I might need for the garden. Now, all I had to do was move it into the backyard, because the whole thing was pretty heavy. I've already started my hugel culture fill and will soon upload the next video to show you how the garden looks with the new addition. See you next time.